Something truly momentous happened in the 19th century, something which changed every aspect of life on the planet, something which unleashed wonderful and terrible powers. If you look at any metric of human activity, from population to economic, scientific, artistic, or literary output over time, it is hard to miss the inflection point one observes in the 19th century. Every aspect of human society was upended, from race, class, and gender roles to political structures. These powers have allowed humans to touch another world, and yet are capable of driving the next mass extinction or ending life as we know it. These events were followed in the 20th century by the most terrible conflict humans have ever witnessed. Over 2 world wars, nations fought battles raging across the globe, culminating in the horrors of the Holocaust and the atomic bombs dropped on Japan. Many living during World War I viewed it in apocalyptic terms, calling it the war to end all wars. As if to echo this sentiment, one of the final battles of World War I occurred on the very plain described in Revelations. In September of 1918, the Battle of Megiddo was fought. It was the climactic conflict of the Sinai and Palestine campaign, where German and Ottoman forces were encircled by the British and French under the command of General Allenby. Even on planetary timescales, the 19th century can be rightly regarded as seeing one of the greatest and most significant changes to affect our species and the life of the whole world. Climate and environmental scientists now recognize that we are entering the next great extinction event, which has been dubbed the Anthropocene extinction. There have been 5 great extinction events on our planet, caused by meteor impacts and various geological events. The result is a great dying off, which killed off 3 out of every 4 species on the planet. The Anthropocene is being driven by human activity, and its acceleration is a direct consequence of the enormous technological and industrial capacities unleashed since the 19th century. We are taught that this change in the world was a natural product of the industrial and scientific revolution, that the confluence of banking, industry, and the sustained and effective use of the scientific method reached a tipping point, driving a dramatic explosion of technology. Yet, outside of secular thought, today most major religions have struggled and for the most part failed to grapple with these changes. This presents a grave challenge, since how the human species collectively manages these changes will determine the very viability of most of the life on this planet. Thus, the values and institutions of human society, which inform our collective decisions, such as religion, morality, and governance, matter more than ever, and their failure to manage these changes can have dire consequences. If ever divine guidance was needed, the time is now. The birth of the Transcendentalist movement had itself echoes of this need for guidance when in 1838 Ralph Waldo Emerson famously addressed the Harvard Divinity School and said, "I look for the hour when that supreme beauty which ravished the souls of those Eastern men, and chiefly those of the Hebrews, and through their lips spoke oracles to all time, shall speak in the West also. I look for the new teacher, that shall follow so far those shining laws that he shall see them come full circle, shall see the world to be the mirror of the soul, shall see the identity of the law of gravitation with purity of heart, and shall show that duty is one thing with science, with beauty, and with joy. The Transcendentalist movement drew on the Judeo-Christian mysticism, as well as beyond to Hindu and Islamic religious traditions. Emerson's observation was, I think, rooted in this curious expectation, which exists in all of the great religions, that foreshadow an important and convulsive event for humanity. For example, the Sanskrit scriptures speak of the end of the Kali Yuga and the appearance of the 10th avatar. Buddhism, which grew out of Hinduism, await the coming 5th Buddha. Zoroastrians await the coming of Shah Brahman, and Muslims, like Jews and Christians, await the Messiah and the Day of Judgment. What Emerson was probably sensitive to, but is little known today, was that in the late 18th and early 19th century, this expectation grew very acute when a renaissance of messianic expectations erupted all over the Christian and Islamic world. In the Christian world, these expectations were known as the Second Great Awakening. Many Christians were awaiting a great change in human affairs. A large number of them were convinced that this would occur around the middle of the 19th century. In 1818, William Miller, a lay Baptist minister from Massachusetts, after careful study of the book of Daniel in the Bible, had determined that by about 1844, all the affairs of our present state would be wound up. A similar sort of expectation even led a group of Protestant Germans, known as the Templars, to move to Haifa in present-day Israel in 1868 to await the descent of Christ. Of course, when they did not observe him physically descend from the heavens as expected, most abandoned these beliefs. And this event, to this day, is known as the Great Disappointment. However, remnants of the effects of this expectation remain to this day in churches and religions like the Seventh-day Adventists, Jehovah's Witnesses, and the Mormon Church. And yet, with each step in the explosive growth in scientific and technological knowledge, serious doubt was created in the nature of the traditional religious understandings of heaven, hell, angels, and even the origin of humans and the world. Further, the major religions appeared incapable of explaining or coming to terms with the tremendous changes occurring. This, of course, seemed particularly strange, however, for those who subscribe to the point of view that the divine has guided humanity in the past. Thus, they were faced with an important question. If our scriptures are really divinely inspired, why did they not warn humanity about an event of this magnitude? Logically, if the sacred scripture from any of these traditions had any valid claim to divine inspiration, they would have at the very least foreseen this event and warned humanity. Even more damning was that most religions remained wedded to the old political and social institutions, which were rapidly crumbling around the world. Instead of anticipating and embracing these changes, they reacted by turning backward, struggling to rebuild and recreate an imagined glorious past. Thus, the events of the 19th century also coincided with the rise of a materialistic philosophy and a precipitous decline of religious belief. It saw the birth of more radical, materialistic philosophies like that of Marx and Nietzsche, as well as a more general rejection of God and all forms of religion. Many in the Muslim world also awaited the coming of the Mahdi and the descent of Christ. Shiite clerics like Sheikh Ahmad and his successor Sayyid Kazim believed in the imminent fulfillment of the prophecies of the Quran. He saw it as his mission to prepare the world for the coming of the Al-Qaim or Al-Mahdi and the return of Christ. This expectation took its most dramatic form when, in the Persian city of Shiraz, in 1844, a relatively unknown merchant named Sayyid Ali Muhammad assumed the title of the Bab, or Gate, and claimed to be the Promised One. His brief but tumultuous ministry had many parallels with the life of Christ, gathering disciples, apparent miracles, preaching against the corrupt clerical establishment, and his execution in 1850. The execution itself was shrouded with miraculous overtones when the first execution squad of 750 soldiers completely missed their mark, and after the smoke cleared, the Bab had vanished from sight. The second attempt succeeded, but shortly after the sun was blackened by a sudden storm. Interestingly, his declaration in 1844 coincided with predictions made by Miller and his co-religionists a world away. When news of the Bab's life and revolutionary teachings reached the West, it attracted a diverse range of admirers, like Joseph Arthur de Gobineau, Edward Granville Brown, and many more, including Leo Tolstoy. The French literary critic of the time, Jules Bois, remembered the effect which the story of the Bab had on the intellectuals of Europe at the close of the 19th century. All Europe was stirred to pity and indignation. Among the littérateurs of my generation, in the Paris of 1890, the martyrdom of the Bab was still as fresh a topic as it had been when the first news of his death reached us in 1850. We wrote poems about him. Sarah Bernhardt entreated Catulle Mendez for a play on the theme of this historic tragedy. Years later, Abdu'l-Bahá would embark on several visits to Western Europe and America. Abdu'l-Bahá was born in 1844, on the very night which saw the declaration of the Bab's mission in Shiraz, Persia. He was the first son of Mirza Hussein Ali, a Persian nobleman who would later be known as Baha'u'llah. Baha'u'llah would become one of the foremost proponents of the cause of the Bab, suffering exile and imprisonment for his belief. In 1863, he declared that he was the one foretold by the Bab, and fairly rapidly attracted most of the Bab's followers, who were by then living underground after a terrible and bloody purge of this perceived heresy by the state and religious authorities. In another strange twist of history, Baha'u'llah would eventually be sent as a prisoner to the penal colony of Akka, Palestine. This occurred shortly after the arrival of the colony of German Templars across the bay in Haifa. Thus, this appeared to fulfill biblical prophecies of the Messiah's appearance in the Holy Land. During Abdu'l-Bahā's visits to the West, he was greeted like the return of Christ or an Old Testament prophet, attracting much attention and admiration, delivering addresses in churches, synagogues, and universities. He warned of what he saw as the impending conflict of World War I. He argued for the emancipation of women, racial equality, reconciling of science and religion, and the dire need for global governance. During a talk he gave at Stanford University in 1912, he claimed, "We are on the eve of the Battle of Armageddon, referred to in the 16th chapter of Revelation. The time is 2 years hence, when only a spark will set aflame the whole of Europe. The social unrest in all countries, the growing religious skepticism antecedent to the millennium are already here. Only a spark will set aflame the whole of Europe, as is prophesied in the verse of Daniel in the book of Revelation of John. Such was the impact of Abdu'l-Bahá's visit that a few years later, during the Battle of Megiddo, one of General Allenby's stated objectives was his security, whose life was under threat of crucifixion from the Ottoman forces. One of the major themes of Abdu'l-Bahá's talks and writings dealt with reconciling religion with science and reason. Put all your beliefs into harmony with science. There can be no opposition, for truth is one. When religion is shorn of its superstitions, traditions, and unintelligent dogmas, shows its conformity with science, then will there be a great unifying and cleansing force in the world, which will sweep before it all wars, disagreements, discords, and struggles. And then will mankind be united in the power of the love of God.